Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 176 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. In case you missed my announcements on social media, I've decided to wind down Welcome to Geektown, or at the very least this iteration of it. I'm thinking about future projects I may want to put under the Welcome to Geektown banner, but if that comes to pass, I'll talk about those when they come closer to fruition. In the meantime, I want to try to wrap up some of the ongoing features I've been working on as part of this podcast. The largest of those is the lesser-known X-Men, or as I jokingly refer to it in the titles, the Y-Men. Finishing this and a couple of the other recurring topics I feel need additional entries to make them feel complete in my eyes will probably take about a year, and should get me to at least 200 episodes, which I feel is a pretty good run. So if you have any topics you want me to cover before I wrap things up, you can still email those suggestions to me at welcometogeektown@gmail.com. But for now, let's get back into that lesser-known X-Men series, continuing in chronological order of when they joined the team. We last left off discussing Psylocke, who officially became a member in Uncanny X-Men number 213. She didn't have to spend much time as the rookie of the team, as another young woman joined just an issue later in Uncanny X-Men number 214. She had turned the team down a couple of times before that, but finally Dazzler became a member in this February 1987 issue. By this point, she had already been a character in the Marvel Universe for 7 years. And the story of her creation behind the scenes is just as, if not more, interesting as her in-universe history, so we'll start there. There's some disagreement on which party originally approached which, but in early 1979, Marvel Comics and Casablanca Records, a division of the Universal Music Group, started discussions of creating a character for Marvel Comics who, like the fictional group The Archies from Archie Comics, would also have songs written and performed for release in the real world by Dazzler. Originally named Disco Queen, then Disco Dazzler in the formative stages. Along with at least one animated special devoted to the character, guest starring other Marvel creations. On the Marvel side of things, Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter assigned this project to Tom DeFalco, Roger Stern, Roberta, or Dickie, McKenzie, and John Romita Jr., who went through a variety of ideas, some of which were vetoed by the creatives at Casablanca Records before settling down on the character printed in the comics. At one point, she would have been a Grace Jones lookalike, with the power to make people tell the truth. But instead, DeFalco's suggestion of giving her light-paced powers won over, and her appearance changed as well, due to other outside influences we'll talk about in a moment. As mentioned, originally slated for an animated special, Neil Bogart, the head of Casablanca, was so impressed with Jim Shooter's pitch that he suggested changing the project to a live-action one, which would have included music and television stars he had under contract as Marvel characters, which could have included Donna Summer, Kiss, The Village People, Cher, and Robin Williams, among others. Unfortunately, Casablanca Records started to fall into financial trouble around this same time, and Bogert was forced out of the company. Casablanca withdrew their connection to the character, but filmmaker John Derek showed interest in turning the property into a feature-length movie, starring his wife, Bo Derek, leading to the character's appearance changing to match the young star. Co-creator John Romita Jr. had to redraw much of the work on the comic that had been created, but still not published at this point, in order to accommodate this, which is not a development he was particularly happy with from what he has said in interviews. In February 1980, Dazzler made her comic debut in Uncanny X-Men number 130 by Chris Claremont and John Byrne. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, the Derricks left the project after their film Tarzan the Ape Man failed at the box office shortly thereafter. Marvel tried to get other studios, either music or film, involved, but no interest was garnered, and so finally Marvel gave up and adapted the one-shot story they had produced into the first 2 issues of an ongoing series. By this point, Dazzler had made guest appearances in Amazing Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, and she continued to meet up with other Marvel characters quite a bit in the first dozen issues, including Doctor Doom, Hulk, Quasar, and even Galactus. Marvel decided to make Dazzler's book special in another way, since all of the music/film/TV crossovers had fallen through, by making her book the first ongoing series only available through the direct market, i.e. comic book stores rather than newsstands. The first issue was a massive success, but sales on subsequent issues fell off, leading to its eventual cancellation in issue number 42, and soon thereafter, she joined the X-Men team. So, who is Dazzler? Well, as you should probably have picked up on, Dazzler, real name Alison Blair, is a singer with mutant powers. Specifically, she can take sound and turn it into light, which she discovered at a high school dance she was performing at. A gang burst into the event and started attacking people. When they reached Allison, her powers kicked in and blinded the attackers. Everyone assumed this was some sort of stage pyrotechnics, and rather than let people know about her mutant status, she allowed them to continue under that false assumption. After graduating college, she became a full-time singer, much to the chagrin of her father, who wanted her to attend law school and become a lawyer. Performing as the Dazzler, she used her powers to make a light show to accompany her performances, continuing the lie that there was a technological source of the lights. While she's mostly associated with disco music, a genre that was experiencing a massive backlash in popularity as she was making her first appearances, she has been able to move with the times, being portrayed as a rock performer or more recently trance/techno. Even though she tried to avoid using her powers for superheroic activities, she continually ended up crossing paths with various heroes and villains and getting into battles, which complicated her singing career. She eventually came out as a mutant. Shortly thereafter is when she joined the X-Men. As mentioned in the previous installment, she and Longshot had a relationship. Earlier in her own comic, she had had a brief fling with Warren Worthington III, aka Angel. This relationship with Longshot led to her getting pregnant and giving birth to future X-Force member Shatterstar, who was taken to the future to be raised. Although at the time of the original pregnancy, her mind was wiped, so she didn't learn about this relationship until many years later, thinking that she had suffered a miscarriage. Since her first stint on the X-Men, she has oscillated between periods where she tries to revive her musical career, to varying degrees of success, and times where she joins a superhero team, including other stints with the X-Men, a time in Excalibur as part of the new Excalibur title, and the all-female team known as A-Force. Her powers have grown significantly over the years, as she can form the light she creates into laser beams, ultraviolet light, useful for killing vampires, shields, rocket bursts, and even holograms that can resemble people. She's also immune to any harmful effects from either sound or light. Finally, she has a couple of weird powers that don't seem to be directly related to her sound-light conversion. She's immune to the powers of her half-sister Mortis, birth name Lois London, who can kill people with her touch. I missed this one when talking about familial power immunity in episode 87. And Dazzler has self-resurrected a couple of times, although it didn't stop her most recent death at the Hellfire Gala during the Fall of X storyline. Currently, Dazzler is one of the X-Men resurrected by Ascani, aka Rachel Summers, discussed in a previous episode, that is working to stop the Dominion in the Dead X-Men miniseries. Outside of the comics, Dazzler has made appearances in X-Men cartoons, showing up in one form or another in every single iteration except the X-Men Evolution series, as well as making her live-action debut in a party scene in the Dark Phoenix movie, where she was portrayed by Halston Sage in a brief cameo. Let's move on to the last of the X-Men to join in the 1980s, literally at the end of the decade. Although his first appearance was in 1984, issue number 184 to be specific, by Chris Claremont and John Romita Jr., Forge didn't join the team until the December 1989 issue of Uncanny X-Men number 255. To this day, we still haven't learned Forge's birth name. Co-creator Chris Claremont stated in his outline for the debut issue of the character that his real name was Daniel Lone Eagle, but we have no in-story evidence of this fact. Forge is a Cheyenne, and was a pupil of his tribe's shaman, training him in mystical abilities. As a young man, Forge served in the Sion Kong War, a retcon invented by writers Mark Waid and Kurt Busiek that unties characters from any specific real-world event like the Vietnam War or Afghanistan conflict that was originally presented as part of their origins. During a battle, Forge used his magic to summon the souls of his deceased comrades and use them to open a gate to another world, summoning a creature known as the Adversary to win the battle for them. At the battle's end, he called for an airstrike to close the portal, which ended up nearly killing him as well, taking his right hand and leg. It was after this that Forge abandoned magic and instead focused on his mutant ability to invent technology, including cybernetic replacements for his lost limbs. Unlike some other super geniuses of the Marvel Universe, like Reed Richards, Tony Stark, and Hank Pym, Forge's abilities literally come from his mutant powers. So if subjected to a power dampener, like the one he himself invented, which we'll talk more about in a bit, he may not be able to understand his own inventions. But with his mutant powers active, Forge can simply look at a device to understand its potential and come up with ways to modify it to perform the tasks he wants. After Tony Stark stopped making weapons for the US, Forge was hired by the Defense Department to create various devices. One of his first was a detection device for the Dire Wraiths, relatives of the Skrulls who could hide in plain sight. Soon thereafter, he invented a device that could neutralize mutant powers, although he had been trying to create a Dire Wraith neutralizer. As soon as Agent Henry Gyrick learned of the device, he took it against Forge's wishes and used it on Storm, seemingly taking her powers away permanently. Coincidentally, Forge rescues Storm not long after from a fall she takes into a river, and the two start a romantic relationship, although that comes to an abrupt end when Storm learns that Forge invented the very device that robbed her of her powers. Watchers of the X-Men 97 show will recognize this storyline as one that is being fairly faithfully adapted in the Life-Death episodes. Forge eventually perfects his Dire Wraith neutralizer and, using a large-scale version of the device, exiles the entire species' homeworld into another dimension. Forge then focuses his efforts on ridding the world of the Adversary, who was on this side of the portal when it was closed by the airstrike. He and Storm get banished by the demonic creature to another dimension, not the same one the Dire Wraiths went to, where time flows differently. Although only 2 issues pass between their departure and return, it was long enough for the pair to not only rekindle their romance, but for Forge to find a way to restore Storm's powers, which are then used to power a gateway back home. In order to defeat the adversary for good, Forge returned to his magical roots and cast a spell. But it required the sacrifice of 9 willing souls. The X-Men of the time, plus Jean Grey clone Madeline Pryor, volunteered, but were immediately resurrected by the Guardian of the Universe known as Roma. The X-Men let everyone believe they were dead for a time, including Forge, who, as the caster of the spell, couldn't be one of the sacrifices. Forge spent some time on the government team of mutants known as Freedom Force, then an interim team of X-Men put together by Moira McTaggart. This is the date used for his joining the team, although he becomes a more official member in issue number 273 after discovering the team that he had sacrificed alive. While he is an active X-Men for a while, he quits the field team and becomes part of their support staff in the 90s, redesigning the Danger Room and the Blackbird jet, among other feats of engineering. His relationship with Storm hits a rough patch, and when Forge leaves the team, he heads back to his hometown of Dallas and starts working for the government again, albeit as an independent contractor. During this period, he helps Mystique out of a schizophrenic episode, and the pair become briefly romantically involved. Something predicted years earlier by Mystique's wife, the precog Destiny, before one of her deaths. Forge then takes over as the liaison to the government-run mutant team known as X-Factor. While originally consisting of only willing volunteers, during Forge's time on the team, it takes a darker turn as criminals Mystique and Sabretooth are coerced into joining by the government. Mystique and Forge's relationship gets deeper as the team breaks off from government ties and goes underground. Unsurprisingly, Sabretooth betrays this team, nearly killing many of its members, including Forge. While he's recovering, Mystique escapes, ending that relationship abruptly. Forge decides not to rejoin X-Factor and spends some time in comic book limbo. I won't go into all of his history after that, but suffice it to say he's involved with the X-Men through a number of stories, whether as an official part of the team, a member of their support staff, or even as an adversary when mind-controlled by Cassandra Nova. In the Krakoan age of the X-Men, Forge was vital in allowing for resurrection of mutants, by adding the ability to store a mutant's memories and personality in Cerebro, which could then be downloaded by a telepath into the new bodies created by another mutant named Egg. As an X-Man, Forge was one of the mutants able to resist Professor Xavier's call to enter the gates during the attack of the Hellfire Gala in the Fall of X storyline. So he is still on Earth, but is not currently actively involved with the team that we're aware of. So back to comic book limbo Forge goes, until another writer decides to return him to the forefront. Next episode, we'll get into the 90s, where we have clones, time travelers, and some of the weirdest powers you can imagine. But don't forget, if there are other topics you want me to cover before the end of the show, I'm still open to those, or just general feedback. Feel free to send any and all of those via email to welcome2geektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome-to-geektown, Twitter @geektownpodcast, Mastodon @welcome-to-geektown @mastodon.social, or Blue Sky @welcome-to-geektown.bluesky.social. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, why not become a patron at patreon.com/welcome-to-geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Lovitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips of the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.